It's Wednesday, May 11th, 2016, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Mike McKean and Ernest Perry. On our program this week, a former Obama administration insider reveals all on how he and others in that office pushed narratives to the media, taking full advantage of reporters' relative inexperience. Farm News fires its cartoonist following a rather pointed editorial cartoon. Did big agriculture influence that decision? And we have an update on that new British newspaper that shunned all things web. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well, but we'll start with a claim that Facebook news curators manipulate trending topics on that social network, suppressing stories of interest to conservative users. The tech site Gizmodo first reported last week on the inner workings of Facebook's trending news team. Pull back the curtain and you're going to find a handful of East Coast educated millennials with access to a ranked list of popular topics. Those folks prioritize which stories go in that trending section that shows up on the right side of your screen and writes headlines and summaries of each topic. They also choose which news sources to link to. Well, Gizmodo anonymously quoted a former curator, someone who identifies as politically conservative, who said they'd regularly come onto Shift and discover CPAC or Mitt Romney or Glenn Beck on that list handed to them, but not in the trending topics because the previous curator didn't recognize the topic or had a bias against maybe some people or topics on it. I guess you could say, in other words, Facebook's news section works almost like any other newsroom.
I suppose in some ways, and that might surprise people, because I think the average Facebook user who knows anything about or thinks they knows a lot about what's going on with the trending stories believes that it's all done by an algorithm. You know, it goes through the things that we like, the people we like, and it brings us stuff that's relevant to us. So I think most people don't even know there is a team of people, contractors, by the way, not Facebook employees, who are going through and doing anything more than just writing a headline or putting together a link. So in some ways, I suppose you could say they're like a normal newsroom in that they're making judgments, but the staffing of that newsroom and the judgments they're making, I think, are a little bit questionable.
Well, to me, it's one of those things where we talk about this all the time, that the news organizations and the news media have sort of lost the control of the distribution. So the distribution on Facebook is handled by people who may or may not have journalism experience, may not understand that, you know, you have different audiences, they want different things. So they sort of go to what they think is important or what they see may be trending among their particular demographic or that sort of thing. And then that winds up on the news feeds that a lot of people see on there.
I thought there was a really good quote in that Gizmodo article talking about comparing this team to, say, a team at CNN or the BBC that has all kinds of editorial folks going over the content, as I said, with a fine-tooth comb. But then he says, Facebook, which is several orders of magnitude more influential than either of those, BBC or CNN, is not commented on, and basically it's a matter of mystery as to what it is that they actually do.
See, and I think that's one of the parts that struck me so deeply, especially as somebody who is constantly looking at social media and how news organizations use social media and adapt to it, is that there are people across the country, around the globe, who are trying to figure out how to game Facebook, how to use it to their news organization's benefit in order to drive audience, in order to bring eyeballs to their websites and attract them through Facebook.
Well, it's not just Facebook. I mean, it's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's Google. They're all doing that to try to basically to bring more people into their platform. So by them actually deciding this is what we're going to put in terms of trending news, they're doing the same thing when it comes to entertainment. They're doing the same thing when it comes to the products that they're trying to do to sell, because that's the goal, is to bring more people in so that we can generate more revenue.
I mean, I'll say this in defense of Facebook. I mean, it's not their fault that, well, it's that they've got 1 billion users or more around the world and that people go there for news. Good for them. Good for them that they have this algorithm that they keep tweaking that is trying to deliver content that is more relevant and interesting to each of us as individuals. That's okay too. But if they're going to try to, quote, act like a news team and make editorial judgments of some sort, then they need to be kind of transparent about how they do that and who they have that's doing that.
Well, the other problem I have here is it's not just Facebook. We talk about all the social media. Who's making a decision on what's liberal and what's conservative? Because in the age of Trump, you have a split among conservatives as to what is conservative. And in the age of Bernie Sanders, you have the same thing going on the liberal side. So, I mean, when you see stories like this, it sort of brings out, okay, who's the arbiter of what is conservative and what is not.
Well, and there are now senators who are calling for studies for investigation into this, the Commerce Commission among them.
Well, this is because Facebook is the 8,000-pound gorilla in the media right now, and it's really hard for news organizations, traditional news organizations, because they don't have control of their own destiny anymore as far as distribution of content. Facebook is the place you have to be, and yet, if these allegations were made against CNN or the New York Times or the BBC or any other number of news organizations that their editors are going through and that they are excluding conservative voices or stories, then I think that would be a big story. So it should be a big story with Facebook.
Oh,
too.
no, I agree. I think it should be a big story. But the whole congressional investigation and that sort of thing, I mean, to me, that's the partisan political environment that we're in.
Exactly. That's further politicizing it, as opposed.
But and again, we have no evidence. Facebook, except for the account of this anonymous former curator, Facebook denies it, although their denial, who knows? But
they're investigating.
Do you disbelieve the notion that if they've got a bunch of contract workers from mostly elite Northeastern universities, these are millennials, you think that they're not exhibiting some sort of a liberal bias in the stories that they choose to put in there? Or for that matter, the stories that they inject into the news feed that are not the most popular stories that people are sharing? You don't think there's an agenda of some sort there? There has to be.
Well, I mean, the question becomes, whose agenda are we talking about? Is it Mark Zuckerberg's agenda or maybe one of the top editors? I just don't know how far into this you want to go before you start accusing one side or the other of manipulating the news content. I still go back to the fact that they are millennials. This is what they're interested in, and they're going to be the ones who are making the decisions on that. So they put it up there.
That, though, and yes, that's great that they're millennials. And Mike, you and I were in a meeting where I brought this up and kind of shouted it in the meeting yesterday. They are millennials making that decision. But if you look at who's using Facebook right now, millennials and teens, the generation coming after them, those audiences are shrinking on Facebook. And the audiences that are growing are the boomers and to some extent, the generation that's online that's older than the baby boomers. That Facebook has become very much of a platform for grandparents to share pictures and stay connected and to do other things. It's not the millennial audience that's on Facebook
anymore. Well, if that's
anymore.
the case, then Facebook needs to rethink who they're hiring.
Have a staff that better represents their audience and their users.
Sounds like what we talk about in the media all the time.
Regardless of whether it's deliberate or not, we've got this walled garden effect where it's bad enough that people are on, if Facebook is the place they get most of their news and they only get it from people who are like them or people they actually like, that's going to hurt the discourse. And then if you've got Facebook adding to that by actually steering the content that appears in that feed, that's even worse.
It's an echo chamber of epic proportions. Well, political cartoons, they're meant to poke and jab to send a message, to evoke a response. And this one, by Rick Friday, did. It shows two farmers standing in a field along a fence talking. One says to the other, "I wish there was more profit in farming." And that second farmer replies, "There is." In year 2015, the CEOs of Monsanto, DuPont Pioneer, and John Deere combined made more than 2,129 Iowa farmers. Well, that got Friday fired from the farm news. The big question is why. Friday says it's because Big Ag wanted him gone. He was told that one of the companies had sent in an email, his boss, redacting the name of one of them, but one of the companies said, "Get rid of the guy or we're pulling our advertising."
I'm not surprised by this at all. You have this. Here's what surprises me.
Okay.
Is that the magazine took the I guess made the decision to get rid of him. I mean, yes, he was a contract. He was a freelancer. It didn't cost him a whole lot of money. But he'd also been a contractor
for 21 years. It wasn't like some guy they just brought in.
Oh no, I agree. Yeah. I mean, there should have been some loyalty there, but I don't know whether or not there was enough pressure put on by Monsanto or John Deere or one of the three that he mentioned to do this. But to me, it was a knee-jerk reaction on the part of the publisher of the magazine to basically get rid of him. And who knows? There may have been other complaints previously about something that he had posted or something that they had printed, and they decided this was the last straw. We're just going to go ahead and let him go.
I wonder if this isn't the tip of the iceberg. I mean, not just at this publication, but at small market publications all around the country. Because here, this Farm News is based in Iowa. Mm-hmm. They serve 33 counties in Iowa. All they cover is what's in the title, Farm News, right? And if you think about the dilemma of any small publisher now, what's their advertising base? Well, for a company like this, it's probably overwhelmingly ag companies, products and services. So if one of them comes in and says, we're pulling our ads, you'd like to think they would do the right thing, but the pressure is really on them. And I thought it was interesting that an editor actually wrote to the employee. You said they not only redacted the name of the company, mm-hmm. but they also redacted a rather colorful expression about what happened in that newsroom once the advertiser called in and complained. I think this could be happening in a lot of other places, and we just don't get to see it.
No, I agree. I mean, I do think it's unusual for publishers to sort of act in this way, because this is a very, very finite audience. I mean, it's small, and for the publication to pull someone who is very popular because of a threat from an advertiser, you could also see the backlash come in terms of people who say, well, you know what, I don't need your publication anymore.
I will say one other thing. Even though this was a small publication serving one state, it's owned by a parent company of small publications from out of state. I believe Virginia was the parent company. So they have absolutely no loyalty to that community or this person who's lived in that community for 21 years.
Very good point.
Okay, well, let's talk about controlling media messages in other ways. This week was a big one for Western journalists being allowed into North Korea to cover the ruling party Congress. This event is supposed to happen every 5 years, but this is only the 5th in the country's 70-year history, and the first since 1980, before its leader, Kim Jong-un, was born. This clip comes from an Associated Press video released in advance of the assembly.
It is normal for North Koreans to describe their participation in the event as an expression of their loyalty and devotion to their leadership when asked in public. The last time North Korea's ruling Workers' Party held a Congress was in 1980. Since then, the country's held 2 big meetings of the party in 2010 and 2012. But this will be the first time the full Congress will showcase its new leader, Kim Jong-un.
The significance of the 7th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea is that it will be a turning point in our revolution. At the 7th Congress of the Workers' Party, the successes of the last 30 years since the 6th Congress in the development of our party and the revolution and construction created by our great leaders will be presented.
So even with media access in Pyongyang, this was no big win for free press.
No, it wasn't a big win. But one of the things I could say is that I actually saw this reporter's coverage before he was kicked out of the country. And in one of his pieces, he was in the museum and they were doing some video in there, and he was trying to take a selfie with the portrait of Kim Jong-un, and the translator or his mentor, moderator, whatever they're calling him, Minder, thank you. His Minder walks over and grabs his phone and takes it over there and starts deleting and saying, you're being disrespectful of our leader and this, that, and the other. I'm watching this and I'm like, he's not going to last in the country too much longer. Lo and behold, a couple hours later, he's gone. So I mean, the whole spectacle of this just intrigues me, because they're trying to put this wonderful light on this big party apparatus, and you can tell that the journalists are, as they're reporting on this story, saying, I can't tell you everything I want to tell you, but it's not right here. It's weird the way they use the way they sort of interpret what's going on there.
And you know, the bigger the story, the more obvious the propaganda, the more careful the minders and all of that. I mean, nothing you're going to see coming out of North Korea is going to come out without minders with its Western journalists. But I actually thought a couple of years ago, David Guttenfelder is a really famous photographer, was working there briefly for the Associated Press, went in and basically with his cell phone and an Instagram account was taking pictures of the everyday life of North Koreans. Now, a lot of that is managed too, but I think you got a better sense of what it's really like to live there than anything that we were going to see coming out of that event.
I mean, what I find unusual is the fact that North Korea is able to put this big of a clamp down in today's social media environment. That is a country that is really closed off from what's happening in the rest of the world, even in going on in China. I mean, China has its own sort of way of manipulating the media and closing things off. I mean, one of the things they're doing right now is the Queen Elizabeth said something derogatory about some Chinese diplomats who were in London, and now whenever that story comes on any of the foreign news channels, it goes to black in China,
which we've seen in the past,
right.
Or the Chinese also controlling messages by banning Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and having their own similar platform.
But it's not to the level that North Korea is.
Where it doesn't even exist.
It doesn't even exist.
Well, I kind of have to laugh as we transition to this next topic, the Obama administration and its relationship with the media. What makes it funny? Nothing at all, actually. Maybe you've seen something about the piece in this weekend's New York Times Magazine. It was a pretty long read with Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications. He's not in that position anymore, but he told the Times that he helped promote a narrative around the administration's negotiations with Iran. Here's a bit of a description on that.
How does the administration respond to that characterization that the public was misled in the selling of the Iran deal?
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen anybody produce any evidence to indicate that that's the case. I recognize that there might be some people who are disappointed that they did not succeed in killing the Iran deal. And maybe that's maybe these unfounded claims are the result of sour grapes. The truth is the administration, at the direction of the president, engaged in an aggressive campaign to make a strong case to the American people that the international agreement to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon strengthened the national security of the United States.
National security or not, Rhodes says it was easy to craft the message and sell it to reporters because of their relative inexperience covering international issues. He said that reporters would call him up to get explanations of what was going on in Moscow or Cairo. He also said, quote, "The average reporter we talk to is 27 years old and their only reporting experience consists of being around political campaigns. It's a sea change. They literally know nothing." It's a pretty damning statement to make right there, but it's one I can pretty easily see how and why he'd make it.
I mean, it's hyperbole, but I mean, again, Rhodes also sees himself as this literary writer, and that's what he wanted to be at the beginning of his career. So, okay, he exaggerated a little bit, but just how much of an exaggeration is it? News organizations have closed their foreign bureaus or shut down many of them at least. They do rely on social media and contacts in Washington to get their international stories. A lot of the newer journalists are younger and probably haven't had as much foreign policy experience, so you can see how they might be easier to manipulate.
I mean, the other thing is that when you look at the news coverage, it's all in sort of a campaign mode. So what he's talking about sort of fits with the news paradigm that we have going on right now, and the fact that, as Mike said, news organizations have cut back on international coverage. They're using more contacts within countries or contract workers or freelancers in order to be able to get those stories. And then when those stories come back, they're usually in the hands of very young, inexperienced editors who are dealing with that information. So I think what he's saying does have some credibility.
Well, and you think of it, too, from the standpoint of campaign mode and being in that continuous campaign mode. So much of the campaign coverage we have seen in the last few elections, I mean, I think of going back to that story, The Boys on the Bus, that study from a few years ago, too, that idea that our campaign coverage has turned into a horse race, that we aren't talking about the issues the way we used to. We're talking about other things, and as a result, reporters are taking almost everything at face value and covering the who fell off the stage or who cried at an event or who ended up eating the wrong food in public.
Well, and of course, it's been happening for a long time now. I mean, at least going back to Bill Clinton's presidency, where the White House has been in 24/7 campaign mode all the time, no matter what the public policy is they're trying to sell. But I thought this profile of Rhodes was pretty interesting because they have taken to using social media in ways and using a few like-minded journalists to basically go around the press corps and to create a narrative that's really hard to counteract.
And I mean, and the other thing, on top of having journalists in key areas, they also have think tanks behind them. They have all sorts of public relations, crisis communication apparatus behind, so they can put the full weight of trying to sell their message to the public, and they can use the media, they can use social media, they can use everything at their disposal. I don't see where he's saying anything that's not really happening there, and I think this is where the news media is sort of striking back, saying, "Well, you're manipulating." Of course, they're manipulating. Mm-hmm. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sell a message.
On some levels, that is strategic communication.
Exactly,
it is. But the one thing that really also stood out for me was that the notion that Rhodes supposedly has a mind meld with President Obama. And if that's true, it isn't just Rhodes, but the president must have a deep contempt for the politicians around him, and the press corps calls them the blob, for example. And it just says something about the coarseness of the relationship between the media and the government, if this is the way that our president and his top national security advisor thinks about us.
But if you go back and you actually read that, the way in which it was written actually sort of takes jabs at what Rhodes is saying, and sort of crafts the message as if Rhodes is some sort of evil manipulator, and the president by extension is also not playing fair with the media.
You wonder why now? Why is this even coming out?
Mm-hmm.
What benefit is there to Rhodes or to the president? And I think basically it's about, hey, who cares? We're doing pretty well. Our numbers are up. We're trying to build a legacy. We're going to get this story out there before we're 24/7 Trump versus Hillary for the rest of the campaign season. Why not?
Obama's numbers haven't been that high since he was trying to determine what his, what was that he said at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, what his major was going to be. The drama continues as Tribune Publishing continues to fight off Gannett's hostile takeover. The latest move, Tribune adopted a shareholder rights plan, also known as a poison pill. It's a defensive measure against unwanted corporate takeovers. Shareholders can buy stock at a discount, making the takeover attempt harder and more expensive. This doesn't really mean much, though, does it?
No, it doesn't really mean much. I think, Gannett is trying to position itself to be able to take over. You have, I'm not sure it's the stockholders, but you have people who are interested in the news component of Tribune saying, "Well, wait a minute, we don't want to be a part of the Gannett empire." So you're having this back and forth, and then you've got the financiers involved who are looking at, maybe if we can get that price up, we can make even more money off of it. So you've got so many moving parts here. It's going to be a while to see whether or not this actually happens, and we haven't even gotten to the part where whether or not the government is going to allow this to happen to begin with.
The poison pill might work. It worked for Netflix when Carl Icahn was trying to take them over. But the bigger question is, does it matter whether Gannett owns the Tribune papers or not? And I'm not sure there is a positive answer to that.
Okay, well, we have another update for you. Remember about a month ago or so, we told you about a new publication in Britain that was going to be print only. No website, no mobile app, just a Dead Tree edition. When we set up that discussion, we took a quick listen to this.
Look, this isn't an idea we dreamed up overnight. This is an idea that we've been working on for over a year. It comes from deep consumer insight, talking to thousands of readers, many of whom are lapsing out of print. As you rightly point out, about 500,000 readers each year choose not to buy a newspaper, and we don't think it has to be like that if the product is right.
I guess the product wasn't right. 10 weeks into publication, New Day is no longer. The Guardian's media columnist, Roy Greenslade, he had a pretty gleeful column on this. You can read it on our links blog, but it pretty much looked and pointed and said, "Told you so, told you so, told you so."
Here's the funny thing about it is that I think we've said the same thing on our show, is that, this is going to have a very hard time catching on because it doesn't have that social media aspect. It doesn't have a website. They didn't do a whole lot of promotion. It was tied to the Mirror, both in its distribution and in the way in which it gathered its news. The staff was way too small. It had to run on the same presses, which meant it had to be out early. They couldn't even get the Leicester City Premier League champions on because they had already been out on the street when that happened. I mean, it was just bad all the way around.
I don't take any glee in the fact that, we told you so, but I mean, come on. I mean, they talked about how they were going to succeed by targeting middle-aged women with stories that were kind of neutral politically, and it just didn't sound like a very compelling product to begin with. And then to try to compete in the British marketplace where there are so many papers to choose from and to not have any access to social media or the web. How was that supposed to work? Had it worked, good for them. And there is some data that suggests that people do like long reads, and maybe there's a handful of people that like to go back and just, sit down and read a printed paper, but there's not a business I think you can build around that right now.
Well, to me, part of the problem was they were basing the decision to do this on analytics, and the analytics was saying that people wanted to read this type of news. But one of the problems it had was how are you actually distributing that? And I think the way they tried to do it just didn't work.
So let me ask you this. One of the things that they had done in the business model was starting out giving it away for free, then raising the price, I want to say maybe to 25 pence, then it was going to go up to 50 pence.
And then it went back down to 25 pence.
When they weren't selling them. Is 10 weeks enough time to give it to have the experiment fail?
Oh, I don't think so. Not 10 weeks, no. I mean, that's just not enough time. And then you pull the rug out from under and say, well, it was an experiment we tried, we'll try something else. It just didn't make much sense to me.
Okay. Were you about to say something?
No, I mean, they had 40,000 readers supposedly by the end of this whole experiment, which might be a lot in Columbia, Missouri, but it's not a lot in Great Britain.
Not in London, for sure. Well, you can read more about all of the topics we talked about on today's program. You can find those on our links blog. It's under the programs tab at kbia.org. We also invite you to like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @viewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we're going to be talking about next week, and more. I'd like to extend our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, and to Kyle Felling for handling the audio for us. We have a couple of other thank yous to give today. First, to our associate producer, Chelsea Vaughn, who has been working with us these last 8 weeks as part of her Convergence editing and producing class. And we would also like to thank our technical director, Maya Jackson. Maya has been part of the Views of the News team for the last 2 years or so. She's been in the control room every Wednesday, first shadowing Travis and eventually directing the program herself with his guidance. Maya graduates from MU this weekend, and we are going to miss her. She's become a part of the Views of the News and the KBIA family. Finally, I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.